Well, hey, Jared, thanks for jumping on and joining me in a conversation. Ridgeland is kind of the incubator for SynergosXP, kind of where we got our start. And it was you and your ministry that kind of made a little bit of a sandbox that allowed us to jump in and just try some things out. And so before we get into that, though, I'd love for you to be able to just take a couple minutes and share a little bit about you, about Ridgeland Church, how you got there, the ministry context you're serving in, just kind of paint that picture a little bit before we jump into some of the nitty-gritty details.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I went to school to Olivet Nazarene University and got my degree in pastoral ministry. And before that, got married young to my wife, Macy, and kind of went through ministry together in a kind of context, and got hired on at College Church University Avenue, which is right on the campus of Olivet, and worked there for about 6 years doing all kinds of different associate kind of roles, discipleship, communications, tech and media, served in children's ministry, all kinds of different stuff. And then I also served as a resident director for Olivet Nazarene University and for the director of their Preaching and Music Ambassador program. And then after that period was done, we moved up to Oak Lawn in 2021, which is where Ridgeland was at. And we had one of our daughters at that point in time. Now we have two. And so it's navigating ministry with, a young family. And so that's just kind of, background. I grew up in the church, grew up, with my grandpa as my pastor the first part of the year or first part of my life. And so church has really never been foreign to me. And so it's just been, something that has been consistent in my life, and then the calling into ministry and everything. And so that's what brought me to Olivet. That's what brought me to College Church, and just kind of continued on through, and always having a passion for church development and church health and discipleship, and how we're going to disciple in this context. And now particularly in a post kind of COVID context, I feel like that's being thrown around of we're in a new kind of context. And so, so that's what kind of was all background of leading up to us coming to Ridgeland. So I'm in a denomination called Church of the Nazarene. I'm an ordained elder. And so when was looking to kind of move on from College Church, our district superintendent reached out about what was Oak Lawn Church of the Nazarene. They had a pastor that was retiring after 21 years. And the board had decided with the district superintendent that they wanted to do something called a relaunch. And so they really wanted to put as much as possible on the table to re-envision ministry and how to reach our community and how to be a church in the southwest suburbs of Chicago. And we're like one of the collar suburbs, so we share a border with Chicago. And so it's an incredibly diverse area. There isn't an ethnic majority, so over 50% of any ethnicity within a 4 to 6 mile radius. Within a 4 mile radius, there's like 330,000 people. And, all of our schools are multi-language and everything. And so it's a super diverse area, and a place that coming in, maybe we didn't know fully, but it's a highly Catholic area, and we love our Catholic brothers and sisters. But honestly, a lot of Protestant and mainline churches are struggling for the most part in this area, and so it's newish ground. It's old ground, obviously, but it's new ground to kind of break into. So
Yeah, no, that's
yeah.
great. So you're southwest burbs of Chicago. A little bit about Ridgeland, just ministry context when you arrived. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we arrived, the church was probably sitting around, like realistically, like 30. And, we had some ebbs and flows above that, but more realistically sitting around 30. Had a board that was like energetic for the future. They were feeling, a little, frustrated coming out of COVID and not being able to get, some things going, and things had kind of been, a little stagnant for a while. And so they, really were open to whatever we were doing. The church context was, leaning towards definitely older, white, and people who had been at the church for 10 plus years. And so there wasn't a ton of families that had even been here since the last 10 or so years. So that was kind of the context that and most of our families were spread out. I mean, not only a third of our families really lived in Oak Lawn. I mean, granted, all the towns kind of blend together up here, but they all primarily lived within a 6 to 7 mile radius of the church.
Hmm, cool. And so that was 3 years ago, right? That you guys arrived?
Almost 3 years ago. Yeah, it would have been summer
Yeah.
of 21. Yeah.
So, and it was your first full senior pastorate, right? As
Yeah.
as lead pastor. And so, what were some of the challenges that you walked into? What were some of the things that you immediately maybe identified as wanting to try and reinvigorate or change? And maybe what were some of the barriers that you ran into as you were taking some of that on?
Yeah. So one of our challenges and blessings is that we run a preschool as well as the church. And so there was the pastor actually of a larger church a larger Nazarene church about 25 minutes away was actually helping with the transition process. And his executive pastor was kind of working with the finance people here to kind of figure some stuff out. And, it wasn't the cleanest books kept. And so I started and was literally like the football was already in the air of like restructuring finances. And so like I hit the ground, and by the end of 2 weeks, we had restructured, finances for, at that point in time, it was about, 650 to $700,000 budget between the church and the preschool. And so from the get go, I mean, like kind of finances, understanding finances and how the organization worked, how tuition worked, how state subsidies worked, how like all of these different realities were just like in my face as soon as I hit the ground. And then, there's always the barriers of like, I'm a younger pastor, right? This is my first pastorate. It's getting to know the people. It's getting to know the community.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting to know the community outside of our church community, because right now our church community it's getting there now, but then didn't represent the neighborhood that we were in. We're literally in a neighborhood context. We're surrounded by houses. Um, we're not like we're on a pretty busy road, but it's in a neighborhood. We're not surrounded by businesses or anything like that. We're not in a business district. It is, you know, house, all around us. And so we didn't reflect that. So it's also understanding who are our neighbors, who are we trying to reach, why the decline, not just of this church, but of a lot of the Protestant and evangelical churches in the community. There's a couple that were doing some good stuff, but for the most part, a lot don't have pastors; they're just lay led, and so it was kind of figuring out what are some of those barriers, and also what are some of the internal barriers. You know, stagnation, people kind of get in their comfortable rhythm and groove. How connected are they to one another? And COVID kind of disconnected some people. And so, anyway, so those were some of the barriers. But really, like from the get go, it was like operational barrier after operational barrier after operational barrier, from a transition from a kind of a pastoral couple that the husband was the pastor and the wife was the preschool director. So they had a new preschool director that came on a couple months before me. And she was great. She had been at the school at that point in time for 17 years as an assistant director, as a teacher. And so there was organizational familiarity there. But not really knowing what the books look like, what's, all the standards and back end stuff. And so, yeah, so those are some of the barriers and kind of the landscape that I walked into the first few months. And then we jumped into relaunch, which was how comfortable are people with change? And the board wanted to relaunch within like a 10-month period. And
Yeah, that's
so,
quick.
it was really quick.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I've been very transparent with them that I would probably do it differently. I would never recommend relaunching a church in 10 months. And we did a ton of stuff. We did. And in a way I say, our people were troopers. Because really for the most part, they went along with it. We did a name change, we did a branding change, we kind of shifted how we were, viewing ministry and really getting involved in our community. But it was a ton to do in 10 months. And so just also that, so between the operational and then also the change of mission and vision and trying to cast that and trying to get people, to understand, and they were largely on board with like, yeah, we need to do something different, but to actually understand what that different is and to be able to like own it themselves, that's a much longer process. So
Really, you were brought in your first pastorate, and how old were you when you stepped in?
I was 27.
Okay, so
27? Yeah,
27,
27.
stepped into your first senior pastorate, and the task was, it's what I would call revitalization, right?
Yeah.
Is to do a church turnaround. They wanted to bring in a younger pastor for younger families. They knew that, and there's a daycare, right? In your background, at college church, you did a bunch of operations things, right? And so it had a lot of administrative responsibility. And so stepping in, it's not like you weren't necessarily fully equipped to do some of that, but it was just a huge undertaking, right? And so,
Yeah.
I use the story of Exodus 17 a lot of times to talk about the partnerships we're trying to create with SXP of, Moses up on top of the hill and trying to have the strength to keep his hands above his head with the staff that God gave him, and Aaron and Hur coming alongside of him when he got weary and tired, so that he could do what God called him to do, which was stay on the mountain. Obviously, there was a giant undertaking at Ridgeland for you. I know for me, we got connected really 6 or 7 months ago now. And I knew that you were kind of struggling with some things, a little overwhelmed, that kind of stuff. Just, can you paint the picture 6, 7 months ago, organizationally, where things were at, maybe where you were at, emotionally, the pressure that was on your family? Just paint that picture a little bit of what I would say is your arms were getting tired.
We relaunched in May of 22, and we started a Saturday morning farmers market. We did, parties all throughout, the different towns around us. And we were just kind of jamming forward, of being involved in our community. And as some of that was happening, as you get to know a church congregation, kind of the wounds start to be seen. And so, there's kind of some recognition that, as we were doing all this kind of community outreach and connection, just letting the community know we are here and we are here for you, we are present. I also realized that, maybe we're not, with some of the stuff coming to light because of how quick we did everything, we weren't ready for a swell of people. And so it's kind of almost an odd thing of like, we're doing all this, community engagement and connection, but we're maybe not fully ready for this swell of people for our people to like healthily receive everybody, just because of, things that had happened in the past. And so we had kind of hit some of the brakes on, what we were doing, wanted to make sure that we were going in the right place. And then, we made some calls to do some preschool expansion because there's some grant money that was coming available, but we had to kind of adjust some of our pay structures in order to also retain some of our teachers and our staff because of the job market. And that started to put us more in a financial bind, even though we were getting in grant money because of the size of our preschool. We ultimately got to the point in 2023 that we were, it felt like we were going like kind of grant check to grant check, like, and just like barely making it. There was some fuzziness on the accounting of our books. Things didn't seem to start to add up on the accounting side, and I wasn't doing the accounting, nor am I an accountant. So someone else on the team was, and with a couple people on the board. And so we got to a point in 2020, fall of 2023, that like things were like, I mean, ministry wise, like people were like growing. A lot of those wounds that were being like were healing, that were kind of uncovered, were healing, and there was like good movement there on the ministry wise. But then I like being choked operationally. Like finances were tight, which means we can't do some of the investment into ministry that we were trying to do. And luckily, we had been able to bring on some staff. There was no ministry staff. And so, I had like additional help on the ministry side and everything as well. But things were just getting choked and tight, and so we decided ultimately to bring in a outside accounting kind of firm to handle our books and some of our bill pay and everything in the fall. But truthfully, like at that point in time, we were swelling to a budget with some strategic expansion, some adjustments to costs and everything, a budget approaching $1 million. From the 650 to 700,000 a couple years prior. And, we were sitting with hundreds of dollars like in the bank. And so it was really like, it felt like from paycheck to paycheck, what are we going to make? I mean, some of our staff, like, waiting a few days to be able to get their paycheck and everything. And so it was and obviously that's stressful. I feel, a responsibility for, essentially 25, people's livelihoods. And then oddly, mine is also connected to it. As in our structure, I'm the president of the organization and the chairman of the board. And so a lot of it comes up to me. And so checking QuickBooks and our bank account multiple times a day, checking our tuition income, our tithes and offerings income multiple times a day to kind of see how things, how can we move this bill? How can we move that bill? A lot of it was a cash flow issue. Some of it wasn't. It was just straight, like, we didn't have it. And so it was getting immensely stressed.
Yeah. So, at that time, like where I think there's always this question, right? That's like, so what do pastors do all week? You know what I mean? Don't they just show up and preach, all this stuff? And, I'm hearing you talk about like state regulations and trying to do a relaunch and, trying to still care for your congregation well, and help walk through and heal some of those wounds. Like a lot of caring for other people and be as honest as you want to be. Where were you at? Like, as far as emotionally, where were you at as you thought about the future of the church or your call to ministry? Like that couldn't have been.
I mean, it wasn't the prettiest moment in my life, that's for sure. And obviously there's pressures on our family. There was times that I was thinking like, I don't know how much longer, like, and by that, it could have been a year or two, it could have been 5 years, but I'm like, if this is what it's going to be like, I'm essentially a business manager. Like, I'm hardly pastoring, I'm doing the care that I can, but I would blink and it would be Thursday and, I'm off Friday and Saturday, working Sunday through Thursday. But then I was doing stuff on Fridays, I was doing stuff on Saturdays, and so, um, and that was, yeah, so just it was just, this isn't what I signed up for, and I know things can change. Like I have, I'm very well aware of, there's things that, we don't fully know what we're signing up for, but I didn't even feel like I was pastoring,
Yeah.
I, was finding 2 to 3 hours a week, usually in an evening, to be able to work on like the message for Sunday,
Yeah.
and it was, you know, yeah, it was, and it was a time that it was like, like we'll just see what happens over the next 6 months.
Fast forward 6 to 7 months. Um, what are some of we started a partnership a little bit, very informal initially. Just kind of personally, I had some time and I had a heart to just help. What are some of the things that have changed organizationally? And what is the impact on those on you and on the organization?
This church has really always struggled with what to do with tuition income and tithes and offerings and how the money gets mixed and everything. Um, it was kind of done separately before I got here, but the church was kind of always pulling from our preschool tuition funds because there was excess there. But it was always kind of in a crisis mentality. So we're like, we're just going to see it as two income streams, but still try to understand that what tithes and offerings is covering and what tuition is. And we had kind of gotten there. Once again, I'm not an accountant, and so we had gotten some input from outside sources to be able to structure it that way. But I think one of the first immediate helpful thing was when you came in, and it was literally within like 3 or 4 days. You're like, hey, this is how I think we should structure the budget. I think it makes sense based off of, this is what tuition can cover. This is what is like shared between, because, we share insurance and we share utilities and like, and like staff that kind of work for both, or support both. And then this is what tithes and offerings can cover. I felt like, and then it was a balanced budget. And I think it's the first time that the church has probably actually had a balanced budget between the different income streams, probably since we started the preschool in like 1965
Hmm.
or whatever. So,
Yeah.
um, and so, so that was a huge help, even also with our board to be able to understand and be able to grasp our finances. Cause I think sometimes it was just, it was a little overwhelming, right? We don't have people on our board that like run big businesses. And we're now sitting at like a $1.1 million budget, right? And so, and there's a lot of pieces to it. And so, most people, if you're like working and you don't deal with spreadsheets and numbers and everything, like you're not seeing, 500,000 for, payroll and, all this kind of different stuff and the impacts of it. And so it was really helpful for our board, like as well as myself and my team, to be able to understand the budget and spend everything, but also for our board leadership to feel like that they could actually have better input into an understanding of where our budget, and where our finances were at, which was a huge need. And then, we did some work on staff structure and responsibilities and delegation, and being and like through an empowering kind of structure. I think, now it's a phrase around here that you gave us, which was, low control, high accountability. And sometimes that's, taking my hands off the reins, and which, is, can be somewhat difficult. And but I think, it's starting to give good clarity for our team. But now, we're at like, I mean, I guess I could say that I largely know what we have on our bank account now. I know we have enough that we're no longer worried about what is, we're tens of thousands of dollars now sitting in the bank. And so when, 8 months ago we had, you know, hundreds of dollars sitting in the bank.
Yeah.
And so I'm not checking QuickBooks every day. I'm not, checking our bank account every day. I mean, I'm getting reports, I'm getting updates, I'm seeing, our spending through some of the spending structures that you put into place. And so um it it's occupying way less of my time. I
Yeah.
mean, way, way less of my time. So um it it is, yeah, it's like for me to be able to describe it would be like a near complete turnaround of where we were at operationally and financially from where we were at 8 months ago.
No, which is great. And I mean, that is our goal. Like I loved last week when we were talking, you held up, you're like, this is the discipleship pathway that I'm working on, that I've wanted to work on for 3 years. And I've
Yeah.
never been able to work on it. Right. Like that's the whole goal of
Yeah.
partnerships.
Yeah. So I had somebody come up actually this last week to me after a Sunday service, and they were like, I was looking forward to this sermon series, but there's just something different about your preaching during this sermon series. And I mean, they don't know this, but because I haven't had to spend as much time on operations and finance stuff, like I've been able to spend a lot more time, which I wanted to, on sermon preparation and pulling in more resources and doing more reading and being able to bring things down to even more to a practical point, which just takes more legwork, instead of just like, here's what the scripture says, and here's some thoughts, and so, which is kind of where sometimes I was at, previously, because that's what I had time for. And so, so even, our congregation is feeling a difference because I'm not spending as much time on operation stuff. And then also my team is feeling a difference
Mm.
because, they've commented, like, they're like, you're a better pastor. Like, you're just, and you're more attentive and you're not as stressed. And they're like, and like, they feel it that, I'm not under as much pressure.
Mhm.
And they're like, not that you were like a bad pastor before, but you were just distracted and overwhelmed. And, and so with, all the operation and money stuff, that I couldn't be fully attentive, to care and to lead and to pastor. And so, um, even though like I feel it internally, like, and I feel less pressure and stress, and no, like I'm not worried as much about, are we going to be able to make the next payroll or whatever? But my team and my congregation and my leadership is feeling the difference, of not being as overwhelmed and having the additional like help and support. So it's been it's been huge.
It's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. So just real quick, and then we'll wrap up. I know the future of Ridgeland felt murky for you. And, you know, just a few months ago, now you think about the future, right? The future of the church. You mentioned we're going through a strategic planning process right now. We're going to be, as we're working through that, be realigning those resources to, this reinvigorated mission and vision, some of those things. When you think about the future, when you dream about the future of Ridgeland Church now, what do you dream about?
Um, I dream about, in a way, what has started to happen over the last 5 months, which is our neighborhood is showing up to church. Um, and that, we're, able to even think about how can we expand and serve our community better? How can we do discipleship, better and holistically? And so, I mean, I don't know what correlation there is or anything, but like it's been, crazy to the point of like since the first Sunday in January to now, and we're towards the end of May, we've had 62 first time guests. We've had, we've had 22nd time, we had 22nd time guests. We've had, 9 people, 10 people now regularly that weren't attending in January, now are regularly attending from those guests. And so, and now we're like pushing a church of 60. We started at 30, now we're pushing a church of 60. And so already this year we're looking at, 10%, growth. And so and people are like serving and giving and getting involved in small groups. And we're doing a project right now to like redo our courtyard, and people have been incredibly generous and they've caught on to the vision and mission of it. And so once again, if we kind of be able to spend more time on how do we cast this vision, how do we, and spend time on it. And so really what makes me hopeful for the future is just I would just love to see what largely has happened the last 6 months just continue to happen. Our community to show up, we're getting more diverse in our congregation. We are looking more like our neighborhood and our surrounding community, and people are getting excited about ministry rather than this is just a place to show up on Sundays. They're getting excited about ministry. How do we serve? How do we come alongside new people coming to follow Jesus? And so that's what makes me hopeful for the future of that. This is an incredibly unreached area. I mean, within a 4-mile radius, I think we have 150,000 people who checked like I have no faith, on the last census. And so it just what has been happening the last 6 months is be like, this place isn't gone. I never thought I'm very much of an optimist, but there is life here, and people are searching, and people are needing community, and people are needing Jesus, which is what my heartbeat is. I want people to come to know who Jesus is, and have him transform their life. And that's been starting to happen more as we've been able to be more intentional, which is really, really cool.
And that's what we say is I think healthy pastors lead healthy churches, and healthy churches ultimately have an impact in their neighborhoods for the kingdom of God. And it's just been really cool to watch for me just in 6 months. We work remotely together, but you can almost just feel some of the shift and some of the change as you interact with different board members and sit in, some of these strategic planning meetings. And it's been cool to see. And it kind of gets me excited to see what's going to happen in the next 6 months, in the 6 months after that, as we begin to bring alignment now around this mission and vision, and, align our executive ecosystem around everything, and, the decision-making structures and accountability structures to actually now be able to align those around a unified mission and vision, so that everybody really starts to have clarity and pull in the same direction it's exciting. It's exciting to kind of see what God's going to do through that. And so as we just get to participate a little bit with that. So no, I appreciate your time today, Jared. And before we sign off, is there anything else that you want to share? I'll give you the last word if you want it.
Yeah, I think just a story that was really cool. We've been going through strategic planning. We're no longer having to focus as much on finances, although, we're wrapping that around our strategic plan. is that we're, working towards a church one, like the Ridgeland Church one. Who are we trying to reach in our community? And as a leadership team, we began to discern and kind of, pull together who that person is and wrote a narrative and kind of a life story of somebody. And I sent it out, we did a board meeting, and then I kind of condensed some of it and wrote a narrative and sent it out. And then the next day, we had somebody who, literally had been connected into our wait list for about 18 months or whatever. And we were just doing some call throughs. And our team over there was, and literally that person walked into the building the day after I sent that narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And which is just a huge confirmation that, being specific is really important, so we can name it and call it. But then also that there are people, our church one is out there, and they're looking for church. They're curious about faith, and they need community. And so, that was just, the most that was last week. And so it was just really cool to see. And I sent that out to the board, and they were just like, whoa, they were like, what a God. Right. And so, it was, so it's little moments like that I think give, it's not always the big moments. It's the little moments like that give me hope, that God truly is working, and that he cares for his church, and that, he desires flourishing and not, just getting by. So, it was just a really cool thing to happen.
No, that's great. I'm glad you shared that story. That's such a cool. I remember when you told me that last week. I mean, your eye you lit up, and you're lighting, like you can tell, for me, I mean, we just want to, at SXP, want to empower pastors and churches towards health. We want to empower pastors and churches to experience joy, fulfillment, and longevity in their ministry calling and purpose. And when you see that, it's like that's why we do, that's why I think God laid it on our heart to do SXP, and it's my heart to hear stories like that over and over and over and over again. And I think it's possible. And so, Jared, thanks for sharing your story, man. Thanks for letting Ridgeland be our sandbox. You took a little bit of a risk, but it's been awesome. Working.
It was a risk worth taking.
Yeah. It's been awesome working with you, and I'm excited to see what God's going to do in the next 12 months.